I am Marlene Brackett. And if you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd be sitting across from a dinner table filled with crystal glasses, polished silverware, and the coldest smiles money could buy, I would have laughed, nervously. Not because I thought it was impossible, but because I never thought I'd subject myself to it again. Yet there I was, feet aching in heels I wore once a year, enduring another round of my family's polite pity and not-so-subtle disdain. And this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't there to fit in, I was there to collect. But before I tell you how I calmly asked my millionaire brother to repay the loan he pretends never existed, right in front of our snobby parents and their sculpted new pool house, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. Let's rewind. I'm a nurse, not a doctor, not a biotech founder, not the face of a skincare line, and definitely not the kind of professional who makes it into glossy alumni brochures. But I love what I do. I hold hands when hearts break, I wash faces that haven't been touched kindly in years, and I sit with the dying when their families are too afraid to look death in the eye. I don't have letters after my name that impress my parents' friends, but I do have gratitude from people who matter. My patients don't care about yachts or stock options. They care that I show up every single day. My husband Lyle is an occupational therapist. We met during an in-home rehab rotation. His patient, my hospice case. I remember watching him help an old woman grip a spoon with fingers that hadn't obeyed her in weeks. He cheered when she succeeded like she'd just won the Olympics. That was Lyle, still is. He believes small victories are worth celebrating. When we decided to marry, I knew telling my family would be like tossing a warm casserole into a room full of fasting monks, unwelcome, confusing, and ignored. They didn't come to the wedding. Said it was too last minute, which was funny, considering we'd mailed invitations 2 months in advance. My mother sent a card, blank, except for her name and best. That should have been enough, should have told me where I stood. But family, no matter how prickly or poisoned, still has a way of latching onto your ribs and pretending it's love. I was the middle child, the gray stitch in a neon tapestry. My older sister, Lindra, ran a luxury event design company that planned galas for pharmaceutical giants and once designed a dinner party for a senator's second wife. My younger brother Carson bought and flipped 5 startups before he was 30, thanks to an early inheritance from Grandpa Brackett and a lot of venture capital from Daddy's poker friends. Me? I got a used Corolla when I graduated nursing school, which they made me pay off monthly to teach responsibility. I was never resentful, not really. Just aware. Aware that my acts of service were sweet, not strategic. That my choices were modest, not admirable. When I'd talk about a patient who passed peacefully, they'd shift in their seats like I'd farted during grace. But if Carson mentioned a company pivot or Lindra name-dropped a celebrity client, it was applause and, "Oh, you must be so proud." Still, I never stopped calling them. Holidays, birthdays, even when Lyle got sick for a few months and we were struggling to make ends meet. I called. They didn't offer help, but I wasn't asking. I just wanted to be seen. To belong. But I learned something the year I turned 35. Invisibility in a family like mine isn't an accident. It's the price of not playing their game. That was the same year Carson asked me for a favor. He'd invested in a tech startup that ran out of liquidity faster than expected and needed a bridge loan just to float for 2 months. He looked me in the eye and said, "It's temporary, Mar. You'll get it back with interest, I swear on Grandpa's grave." I wired him $42,000. It was nearly everything we had in savings, scraped together from night shifts and Lyle's private sessions. We didn't even have a proper honeymoon because we'd been building our home care program out of pocket, 1 client at a time. That was 4 years ago. No repayment, no interest, not even a mention. And now as I sip chilled water from a crystal glass and watch Carson laugh with a mouthful of duck confit, I know what I came here to do. But first, I need to let the evening unfold. The first time I realized I was invisible to my family, I was 12 years old, standing on the edge of the living room rug with a certificate in my hand. I just won the middle school essay contest for the district, first place out of 80 students. My English teacher, Mrs. Harkness, had said my piece on quiet heroes made her cry. I was proud. It was the first time I'd ever felt like my words mattered. I held out the certificate at dinner, hoping anyone would notice. Lindra was talking about her cheerleading tryouts. Carson was showing off the new watch he got for being Student of the Month. My mother nodded absently and said, "That's nice, dear," without even looking up from her plate. Dad didn't say a word. By dessert, the certificate was folded into a square and stuffed into the pocket of my jeans. That moment replayed in different costumes over the years. High school graduation? They came, but only because Lindra's alma mater was hosting the ceremony. My parents left before my name was called to beat the traffic. Nursing school pinning? They sent a flower arrangement. I watched every other graduate hug their mom or dad, while I smiled into a phone camera and thanked the florist. My family didn't hate me. That would have been easier to understand. What they gave me was worse, polite disinterest. A hollow, low-maintenance kind of neglect, as if loving me too loudly might tarnish their carefully arranged reflections. Carson, of course, was the golden child. He'd skipped college to build stuff, and wore hoodies to family brunch, like he was some sort of Silicon Valley oracle. When one of his startups got featured in Tech Buzz Weekly, my father printed out the article and framed it. He hung it in his office beside his own Rotary Club awards. Lindra was treated like a brand ambassador for our bloodline. She had a signature scent, her own line of monogrammed stationery, and a lifestyle blog with 20,000 followers. Once, she gave a TEDx talk about transformational hosting. My mother cried during the live stream, not for the message, for the lighting. "She just looked so radiant," she said. And me? I was the one who brought home the flu from her patients and occasionally smelled like antiseptic and sadness. I was the one they nodded at when they wanted to seem humble. "Our Marlene does important work too," my father would say with the same tone he used when he talked about tipping valet drivers. When I married Lyle, I think part of me still hoped someone in my family would rise above it, that they'd surprise me, maybe a toast, a gift, even a call. But the silence rang louder than a rejection. We had a small ceremony. Backyard, friends only, fairy lights wrapped around the tree. Lyle planted the year his mother passed. I wore a second-hand dress, and Lyle cried when he saw me walking down the lawn. I didn't care that there was no string quartet or monogrammed napkins. I cared that the people there loved us. That night, as we danced barefoot to an old Norah Jones song, I caught myself glancing at my phone, half expecting a message from Lindra or Dad. Some part of me still held on to the dream of a family that would reach out, uninvited but welcome. Instead, I got silence. The kind that settles in your chest like cold air in an empty room. And yet, I kept showing up. Every year at Thanksgiving, I brought gluten-free stuffing for my mom, even though she never touched it. Every Christmas, I wrapped gifts by hand with little notes attached, only to watch them pile up in the guest room unopened. When Carson got engaged to his girlfriend Celeste, I RSVP'd yes immediately, and even helped her mother organize the rehearsal. No one remembered to thank me. Invisibility had become a second skin, thin enough to feel everything through it but never thick enough to shield me. I suppose I should have let it go, pulled away, quietly, with my dignity intact. But there's a strange sort of gravity when it comes to families like mine. You orbit around their attention, hoping one day you'll be pulled in closer, only to realize they never even saw you floating there. So I stopped orbiting and started building. That's when Lyle and I got serious about our little idea, a home care model that respected both the caregiver and the client, blending medical excellence with dignity and emotional intelligence. We called it Gentle Pathways. We started with just 2 clients and a Craigslist ad. I worked nights, Lyle worked weekends, and we poured everything we had into it, not just money, but heart. The irony? My family never asked what I was working on. They assumed I was still doing the nurse thing. They didn't know what I'd built, but they were about to find out. It started with a patient named Irma. She was 84, a retired piano teacher who had fallen in the shower and fractured her hip. Her son, living 2 states away, hired us after reading one of our early flyers posted on the bulletin board of a community center. I remember walking into her home the first time and seeing every surface covered with sheet music, Chopin, Debussy, and even some original compositions. But it wasn't just the music that stuck with me. It was the way Irma looked at me when I walked in. Like, she didn't expect kindness to arrive wearing scrubs and a messy ponytail. We took care of her for 6 months. Lyle would help her with stretches and walking drills, while I managed her medications and monitored her vitals. But the part Irma loved most? Talking. Telling us about the students she missed. The notes she could still hear when the house was quiet. The silence she didn't know how to fill. She cried the first time we brought her a mini keyboard, so she could practice again. She cried the second time, too, when she realized she still remembered every note of Clair de Lune. That was when I realized we were onto something bigger than just elder care. What we were offering wasn't a service, it was dignity, joy, connection. Gentle Pathways began to grow, not in some viral splashy way but like a well-rooted vine. Slowly, purposefully. By the time we hired our third nurse, we were already fielding more inquiries than we could handle. We didn't have a marketing budget. What we had was word of mouth. Testimonials from families who finally got to sleep through the night, knowing their loved ones were being cared for like kin. Lyle and I put every cent we made back into the business. We drove the same 2 beat-up cars and still shared a single laptop for invoices and care reports. But then, something shifted. A daughter of one of our clients, Janine Weathers, who ran the HR department at a regional healthcare network, pulled me aside during a visit. "Why isn't this model more widespread?" she asked. "This is what care should look like." 2 months later, she introduced us to a network of clinics that wanted to pilot our approach across 3 counties. They offered a modest upfront grant and a back-end deal if we could prove our results. We did. Within 9 months, ER visits for elderly patients in that region dropped by 28%. More families kept their loved ones at home instead of opting for early assisted living placements. Nurses wanted to work for us. They said our model gave them permission to be human again. Still, we kept it quiet. Not because we were hiding, but because success built from purpose doesn't need to shout. I didn't tell my family. Why would I? They never asked. And by that point, I wasn't sure I wanted them to know. Part of me liked the silence. It gave us room to build without judgment. Even when Carson still hadn't repaid the loan, I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't worth the drama, that the money was a lesson in detachment. But deep down, it gnawed at me. Not just the debt itself, but the complete erasure of it. He'd look me in the eyes at Christmas and ask if we were still doing the nurse thing, like I hadn't sacrificed everything to help him once. Lyle wanted me to press him. "It's not about the money," he'd say, "it's about the story he's telling himself, that it never happened." But I waited. I waited through milestones. Our 5th employee. Our first full-time administrator. The day we finally broke even. I waited even when Gentle Pathways started turning a profit. Even when a private equity firm sent a letter requesting a meeting. Even when we sat in a conference room with a dozen suits and realized halfway through the pitch that they needed us more than we needed them. It wasn't until they offered to acquire us, at a valuation I still can't say out loud without feeling like I'm talking about someone else, that I understood just how much we'd created. The contract was pending. Final signatures were to be delivered that week. Once inked, Lyle and I would walk away with enough to never work again if we didn't want to. And still, I didn't tell my family. Until the invitation arrived in the mail. Thick cream cardstock, gold foil edges. "You are cordially invited to the Brackett family dinner, Friday 6 p.m. I read it twice. Same venue as always, the private dining room at the Lanesboro Club. Same guest list, minus Lyle of course. He was never invited. "It's just family," Lindra once said when I asked why. I set the invitation down and looked at the calendar. The dinner was the day before the acquisition was scheduled to close. Poetic. Lyle watched me read it and asked, "You going?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." He didn't say anything more, just reached for my hand and squeezed it. No pressure, no judgment. Just love. That night I took a walk by myself. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of my breath and the soft crunch of gravel under my sneakers. I wasn't going for closure. I was going to remember who I was, right before they tried to make me forget again. The day of the dinner I woke up early, not because I had errands to run, but because my mind wouldn't let me sleep. It kept looping the same question, why am I still trying? Not just with them. With the whole charade of being part of a family that only remembers me when they need a nurse or a favor. I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam curl upward in delicate swirls. Lyle shuffled in wearing his old navy robe and a sleepy smile. "Nerves?" he asked, pouring himself a cup without waiting for my answer. I nodded. "You'd think after all these years I'd stop caring." "You don't care about them," he said gently. "You care about that version of you that still hopes they'll change." He was right. That younger version of me, 12-year-old Marlene with the folded essay certificate, still lingered, still reached for something soft in people who only offered polished surfaces. We went through the day like it was any other, which in itself felt strange. My phone buzzed constantly with lawyers confirming final acquisition clauses, accountants verifying distributions, and our administrator letting us know that Channel 4 had asked for a quote for their upcoming segment on compassionate elder care. I handled each call with calm precision, like a nurse organizing a trauma room, and then slipped into a dress I hadn't worn in years. It was navy with a modest slit and a neckline that made me look put together without trying too hard. I didn't wear pearls or designer heels, just earrings Lyle gave me for our 2nd anniversary. Tiny silver drops shaped like teardrops, soft and strong. He walked me to the door. "You don't owe them anything," he said. "But if you're going to collect, do it on your terms." "I'm not going to fight," I said, half to him, half to myself. "I'm just going to be undeniable." The drive to the Lanesboro Club was short, but I took the long way, winding through back roads, passing the clinic where we met Irma, the church where we held our staff appreciation lunch, even the bakery that always donated scones to our clients during the holidays. I wasn't stalling. I was remembering who I was before I crossed into that cold, curated world again. The valet smiled at me like I was someone's assistant. "Evening, miss? Table for?" "Bracket," I said. "Private dining room." His eyebrows lifted just a fraction before he handed me a ticket and nodded. I walked in like I belonged, because I did. Inside everything was as expected, too much crystal, too little warmth. My mother sat near the head of the table, her platinum hair swept into a tight bun. Lindra stood near the bar in a dress that probably cost more than my first car, deep in conversation with 2 men I didn't recognize. Carson, of course, was mid-laugh, his perfect teeth flashing like billboards for success. No one noticed me for a full minute. And then my mother looked up and gave a restrained smile. "You came?" "I did," I said simply, taking the seat nearest the end of the table. Lindra joined us and glanced at my dress. "Charming. Vintage?" I smiled. "Sentimental." There were 12 of us total. Old family friends, a few extended cousins, and the same small inner circle that always occupied these dinners. Each person had a glass of something sparkling. No one asked what I wanted to drink. The first course was served, some artful smear of beet puree and a scallop perched like a crown. And the small talk began. Business, vacations, the new tennis court installation at Carson's place. Not a single question about my life. And I didn't offer, I just listened, observed. I watched my father pour wine like a ritual. Watched Carson brag about his latest investment like he hadn't defaulted on a personal loan from his own sister. Watched Lindra preen under compliments for hosting a wellness retreat in Aspen, even though it had been panned in 3 separate reviews online. It was theatrical, all of it, like a tableau of a family playing themselves. Then, as the main course arrived, my mother turned to me with a smile that was just a little too bright. "So, Marlene, are you still doing home visits? That nursing thing?" "That nursing thing." I nodded, measured. "Still helping people, still building things that last." Carson chuckled. "Hey, speaking of building, I just had to turn down a private equity deal this week. Can't let them undervalue my work, you know." I tilted my head, barely breathing. "Interesting, we're finalizing one tomorrow." That stopped him. "Oh," he said. I let it hang there. No elaboration, no flex, just truth. The silence that followed was golden. Dessert came, a delicate lemon tart, a smear of elderflower cream, and something that looked like spun sugar and regret. I took one bite and put my fork down. My stomach was calm, my heartbeat steady, my mind razor sharp, because I knew what came next. Tomorrow, our company would no longer be ours, and tonight I wasn't just attending a dinner. I was preparing for a reckoning. The moment the server cleared the dessert plates, my father raised his glass. "To family," he said, as though the word hadn't been weaponized 1,000 different ways in this room. "To endurance. and to legacy. Glasses clinked, laughter fluttered politely across the table like napkins in a breeze, and I stared at the untouched wine in front of me, feeling a strange dissociation. These people had never cheered for me, not once, but they were toasting as if we all shared the same story. Then came the Inquisition. "So, Marlene," said Aunt Glenda, swirling her Chardonnay, "you're still doing the little care project?" "It's not little," I replied with a soft smile, "but yes." "She means the nurse thing," Lindra said, flashing her teeth. "Honestly, I think it's sweet. Marlene's always been so good with the elderly." It was the kind of compliment that came wrapped in gauze, sterile, safe, and full of nothing. Carson leaned in. "Do you still do like sponge baths and injections, or have you moved into, I don't know, the management side?" I paused. "I run the company." His brow twitched. "Oh, wow, how many people?" I met his eyes. 38 full-time staff, 20 part-time contractors. We cover 3 counties. That silenced him, but only for a second. "Still small batch though, right? I mean, boutique. People love boutique, super niche." He gave a knowing nod, like he'd just given me a gold star. I nodded. "Sure, if you call improving regional health outcomes a niche." Lindra coughed into her napkin. "You've always had that edge," she said, as though it were an allergy or a nervous tic. My mother stepped in then, her voice cool and even. "We've always supported your choices, Marlene, even when they've been unconventional." I had to swallow hard not to laugh. Supported? They hadn't supported me. They'd tolerated me, like background noise they couldn't quite turn off. And now that they sensed something shifting, they were fumbling for control. But I said nothing, I let them go on. My cousin Blaine asked if I was still renting. I said no. We'd bought a craftsman-style house last year with a sunroom and a wraparound porch. "Oh, that's lovely," he said. "Your patients must really enjoy that." I raised an eyebrow. "That's where I live." He blinked, confused. "Oh, I assumed." "You assumed I lived where I worked?" He flushed, mumbling something about mixed signals and changing topics. The conversation circled around me like buzzards around a patient who hadn't coded yet. Every question was a test, every comment, a needle. "You must get so tired being on your feet all day," Lindra mused, as though I were still wiping trays in a hospital cafeteria. "I don't know how you do it. I'd be exhausted." I smiled. "I am, and yet here I am." That shut her up for a minute. But Carson wasn't done. "You know," he said casually, refilling his glass, "it's funny, Celeste and I were talking about your wedding the other day. We felt awful for missing it. Just the timing, you know." "Of course," I said evenly. "You were busy. I remember." He nodded, clearly expecting me to let it go. But I didn't. "You also never acknowledged the loan," I said suddenly, like slipping a knife between the ribs. The table went still. Carson's smile froze, half melted. "What?" "The loan," I repeated. $42,000, 4 years ago. You needed a bridge. I gave it. You said I'd get it back." Lindra's fork clinked against her plate. My mother stiffened. Marlene," Carson said, glancing around. "Is this really the time?" "It's exactly the time," I replied. "I was invisible when I gave it. I won't be invisible collecting it." My father cleared his throat. "This is inappropriate. We don't air personal disagreements at the table." I turned to him. "Then maybe you should have acknowledged me before dessert." Silence again. Real silence, not the awkward type, the kind that prickles. Carson started to speak, then stopped. My mother stared at me like she'd just noticed a crack in the china. I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for integrity." "Look," Carson finally said, his voice brittle, "I don't remember the exact terms, okay? I've had a lot of ventures, a lot of movement. Maybe I thought it was a gift. I mean, you never followed up." "You're right," I said. "I didn't. I was too busy working 70-hour weeks so I could make payroll for a business you never cared enough to ask about." He laughed, awkward and sharp. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said, rising slowly. "What's ridiculous is that I had to come here, endure being talked down to like I'm still changing bedpans in a basement ward, just to say what should have been said years ago." Lindra muttered, "God, Marlene, this isn't you." "You're right," I said, reaching for my clutch. This is the me who finally stopped waiting for someone else to validate her. And then I sat back down. Because I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I didn't plan on staying for the fireworks, but they lit the match for me. It was my father who spoke first, his voice clipped, controlled. "We've all tried to be patient, Marlene, but this this grudge holding? It doesn't reflect well on you." "Reflect well?" I echoed, my voice calm, even as something in my chest began to simmer. "Dad, I've been a ghost at this table for over a decade, and you're worried about optics now?" He pressed his napkin to his mouth. A pause, then a sigh, the kind he used when Carson lost a tennis match at 16, or when Lindra switched majors 3 times. Disappointment masquerading as restraint. "It's not personal," he said, "but the choices you've made, they've taken you out of alignment with what this family stands for." There it was, the quiet, loaded disownment. Carson leaned forward, emboldened now. "Exactly. Look, we're not saying you haven't worked hard, obviously you have, but it's just, you've always gone your own way. You don't show up for events, you never check in with Mom, and half the time we hear about your life from your Facebook posts." I blinked. "You mean the posts you never like or comment on?" He rolled his eyes. "See, you're always measuring, always turning everything into a tally." "And what are you doing right now?" Lindra cut in before he could answer. "This isn't about money or posts. It's about values. You married someone we didn't know. You left the city to do whatever it is you're doing, and you didn't even ask for our advice. You just disappeared." "I disappeared," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. They didn't notice the irony, of course, that their version of family required me to shrink, to silence myself, to show up with empty hands and a full smile no matter how deep the wounds. "Well," I said slowly, pushing my plate away, "thank you for clarifying." My mother's voice was sharp then. "Marlene, don't be dramatic." But I wasn't being dramatic, I was being awake. "It's not dramatic to expect acknowledgement," I said. "It's not dramatic to want the people who raised you to remember that love is more than optics and matching outfits." Lindra scoffed. "You're twisting this." "No," I said, "I'm finally untwisting it." And then, like a director calling cut on a bad scene, the moment broke. Carson stood. "I think it's best if we all take a breath. This was supposed to be a celebration." "Of what?" I asked. "Of family," he said, a touch too rehearsed. "That was when I did something none of them expected." I reached into my bag, pulled out the acquisition letter, and set it gently on the table. The Brackett family crest on the invitation now seemed laughable next to the letterhead from Bright Spring Capital. "What's this?" Lindra asked, leaning forward. "A signed agreement," I said. "As of tomorrow morning, Gentle Pathways becomes a national care model. We're being acquired, 7 figures. Lyle and I will own a significant stake in the parent company, and I'll be the new head of ethical care strategy across 4 states." Their faces dropped in unison. You could have heard a toothpick fall. Carson's mouth opened but nothing came out. My mother's wine glass trembled just slightly in her hand. My father blinked at the document as if it had been written in another language. I smiled, not smug, not triumphant, just free. "No one here asked," I said, "so I thought I'd bring my own applause." "You've been sitting on this?" Lindra's voice was small, almost brittle. "For months," I said. "We didn't need to prove anything, but I realized tonight I needed closure." Carson looked pale. "And the loan?" "You owe me $42,000, I said, looking him straight in the eye. "And no, I don't need it. But you're going to pay it back. Because integrity isn't about capacity, it's about character." My father stood, hands pressed to the table like he needed support. "You've made your point. I wasn't trying to," I said, "but it seems your silence left plenty of room for me to speak." I picked up the acquisition letter and slid it back into my clutch. "I wish you all well," I said. "I really do, but if your love comes with terms, I'm returning it, unopened." And with that, I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked past the rows of empty plates and forced smiles. No one tried to stop me. No one could. The valet was waiting outside, holding out my keys with a look that said he'd seen enough people exit this club with broken illusions to know I wasn't the first. But I felt whole. More whole than I ever had inside those velvet-covered walls. As I pulled out into the street, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lyle. "Home's warm, I've got tea waiting." And just like that, I remembered where I truly belonged. I didn't cry on the drive home. I thought I might. I thought the weight of decades, of being seen as less than, of finally naming the wound out loud might crack me open. But I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. Instead, I drove with both hands on the wheel, windows cracked just enough to let in the cool evening air, the city behind me growing smaller with every turn. When I pulled into our driveway, the porch light was already on. Warm and steady. Through the front window I saw Lyle curled up on the couch in his usual spot, a mug in one hand, a book in the other, our dog curled at his feet. Peace. Real peace. Not the curated stillness of my family's dining room, but something lived in and soft, with chipped mugs and threadbare blankets that carried our stories in every fray. I opened the door, and Lyle looked up, eyes searching mine. "Well?" he asked, setting the mug down. I let out a long breath. "It's done." He nodded. "You okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said. "I think I just witnessed the funeral of an illusion." He pulled me into his arms without another word, and we stood there for a long moment, just breathing together. Later that night, when we were curled up in bed and the world had quieted, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. At first I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Hello?" "Marlene?" A familiar voice, tentative. "It's Celeste, Carson's wife." I sat up a little. "Oh, hi. I just wanted to say I heard what happened tonight." I didn't respond. She continued, voice soft. "I'm sorry, I didn't know about the loan. Carson never mentioned it." "Of course he didn't." She hesitated. "He's pacing the living room like a caged animal. I think tonight shook him. I think it shook all of them." I exhaled. "It wasn't about revenge, Celeste. I didn't go there to humiliate anyone." "I know," she said, "but sometimes the truth feels like a slap when you've been lying to yourself for too long." We were both silent for a moment. Then she added, "You know, I always wondered why he spoke about you like you were some distant cousin. Now I get it. You made him uncomfortable. Because you did something real, something lasting, and you did it without needing their permission." "I didn't need their permission," I echoed, more to myself than to her. Before we hung up, she said, "You deserved better. And if it means anything, I see you." After that, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. It's strange how the quiet can change once you've cleared space for your own voice in it. The next morning, the deal closed. Emails poured in. Lawyers, press liaisons, congratulatory messages from clinic partners and old clients who had heard the news. There were even a few inquiries from regional newspapers asking if I'd be willing to share my entrepreneurial journey. I ignored most of it for the first few hours. Instead, Lyle and I celebrated in our favorite way. Cinnamon pancakes in pajamas, jazz records spinning, the dog snoring on the rug like a retired security guard. At noon, a package arrived, a sleek white box tied with silver ribbon, no return label. I opened it slowly. Inside, a handwritten note. "Marlene, you were right. The money is being wired today, no conditions. I hope someday we can talk without the past sitting between us. Carson." No apology, but an acknowledgement. And honestly, that was enough. Later that afternoon, I met with our leadership team, our nurses, case managers, and care liaisons. We sat in the conference room where we used to hold potlucks, and now discussed rollout strategy for our next statewide expansion. Before we began, I stood and took a breath to say this. I told them, "What we built, what you helped make real, isn't just about care. It's about rewriting the story people tell themselves about aging, about dignity, about what it means to matter. You matter. Every call, every night shift, every note of encouragement. We're not just a company. We're a lifeline." They clapped, some smiled, some blinked fast to hold tears in. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen in exactly the way I wanted to be. Not because I demanded it, but because I had finally stopped waiting for it from the wrong people. The truth was no longer a burden to hide. It was a banner I could raise without shame. 2 days after the dinner, I received an email from my mother. No subject line, just her name in the sender box, sterile as ever. I hovered over it for a few seconds before opening it. The body was short. "Marlene, we were surprised by your news. I'm glad you've found something fulfilling. Your father and I will be at the club next week. If you'd like to stop by, we can discuss things further. Love, Mother." No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the years I'd spent being their afterthought. Just a vague nod and an invitation to the same space where they'd tried to erase me. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to. That's the thing about finally standing up in a room where you were expected to kneel. You stop asking for a seat at their table. You build your own. I spent the next few weeks immersed in what truly mattered. We onboarded new staff for our expanded program. Lyle and I took a trip to the coast, walked barefoot on driftwood-strewn beaches, and ate seafood off paper plates with no phones allowed. I slept through the night without dreaming of confrontation. My body felt different, unburdened, like it was no longer guarding itself. And then, one afternoon, I got the call. An assistant producer from a national public radio program had heard about the acquisition and the heart-forward business model we'd created. They wanted to feature us on a segment about redefining success in healthcare. I said yes, not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted our story, the real story, to reach someone out there sitting at their own family dinner, being told they were too small, too soft, too outside the lines. The interview went live on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, our inbox was flooded. Hundreds of messages, some from caregivers, others from daughters and sons like me, who had spent their lives under the weight of someone else's expectation. One message stayed with me. "Hi Marlene. I don't know you, but I just listened to your interview and cried the whole way through. My family thinks I'm a disappointment because I left a law firm to become a hospice worker. I felt so alone in that choice. Hearing your voice, your clarity, made me feel less like a failure and more like I made a decision with heart. Thank you for being brave. Ray." I read it aloud to Lyle that night. He didn't say anything at first. He just pulled me closer, resting his chin on my shoulder like he always did when he wanted me to feel safe. "Maybe that's why everything happened the way it did," he said softly. "So someone else could see themselves in your survival." I didn't answer. I just nodded, tears brimming, not from pain this time but from the deep gut-level realization that I had shifted from surviving to shining. A week later, Carson's repayment hit my account. No message, no explanation, just a transfer with the description, "GP repayment." I didn't need more than that. Closure doesn't always come wrapped in redemption. Sometimes it just comes with a final period instead of a question mark. As for my parents, they never followed up. No flowers, no dinner invites, no tearful apologies. And yet, for once, I didn't ache for them too. Because something had shifted permanently inside me. I no longer needed to be understood by people who refused to see me. I had found my own reflection, not in their eyes, but in the lives I'd touched, the caregivers I'd mentored, and the patients who had trusted me with their most vulnerable moments. Their silence? It used to feel like punishment. Now, it just sounded like distance. And I was okay with that. Because I wasn't lost anymore. I was standing on solid ground of my own making. The Sunday after everything settled, we hosted a backyard dinner at our place. Nothing fancy, just folding chairs, mismatched plates, and the scent of roasted rosemary chicken drifting through the breeze. The people gathered weren't bound to me by blood, but by something deeper. Trust, gratitude, laughter, shared purpose. My real family. There was Tamra, one of our first caregivers, who now led our onboarding program. She brought her teenage daughter, who sat beside me and told me she wanted to be a nurse just like her mom. Just like me. There was Jeremy, one of our early patients turned advocate. He was in remission now, walking with a cane but beaming with stories about how his new physical therapist bossed him into strength. He insisted on bringing the coleslaw, which was more vinegar than cabbage. But no one said a word. Even Irma's son came, having stayed in touch long after she passed. He brought one of her compositions, now published, and played it softly on the upright piano we kept in the corner of the sunroom. We laughed, we toasted, we cried a little too. At one point, Lyle raised a glass and said, "To Marlene, who proved that compassion scales." The table erupted in cheers and I felt my throat catch, not from shyness but from recognition. This messy, real, joyful gathering was everything I ever wanted that the Lanesboro Club never gave me. No pedigree, no posturing, just people. Real people. Later that night, after the last dish was rinsed and the fairy lights buzzed softly in the trees, Tamra lingered behind to help stack chairs. She paused, looked at me and said, "You know what I think? I think some of us are born into families, others build them. Brick by brick, moment by moment." I smiled. That's what Gentle Pathways is too. We didn't just build a company, we built a village. And it was true. Our staff sent each other soup when sick, our clients' families sent holiday cards. We celebrated birthdays and cried at funerals. It was a business, yes, but it was also a living, breathing support system. A few days later, I went to visit one of our longtime clients. a woman named Delia, who had once been a poet and now struggled with early dementia. She didn't always remember who I was, but she always smiled when I entered the room. That day, she held my hand and said, "You have an aura about you, dear, the kind people trust when they forget where they are." I squeezed her fingers gently. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me this year." She blinked, then added, "Also, I like your shoes." We both laughed. On the drive home, I thought about the chasm between blood and belonging. My family of origin valued image, legacy, and accolades, but my chosen family, we valued eye contact, warm hands, showing up, and for the first time I didn't feel bitter about the difference. I felt lucky, because I knew what real connection looked like. I lived inside it. It wasn't reserved for holidays or performances, it was daily, quiet, consistent. Like Lyle waiting at the door with tea, like Tamra checking in after a hard shift, like Jeremy's crooked grin when his cane slipped. Love, I realized, is not about who claims you. It's about who shows up for you, again and again, without applause, without agenda, just because they can't imagine a world where you're not held. One by one, the boundaries I never knew I was allowed to build started taking shape. It didn't begin with a grand declaration. There was no speech, no burning of bridges, just small, quiet decisions that honored the woman I had finally become. The first came when Lindra sent a group text about organizing our parents' anniversary party. She assigned roles, of course. Carson was to handle the venue, Blaine the bar, and me? "Can you help with setup and maybe do something with flowers?" I stared at the message for a while, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I wrote, "Hi everyone. I won't be attending. I wish them well, but I'm focusing my time and energy on people who celebrate me year-round, not just when there are centerpieces to arrange." I didn't send it right away. I let it sit for an hour, rereading it. Not sharp, not cruel, just clear. Then I hit send. The read receipts blinked one by one, no replies, and that was fine. Boundary number 2 came in the form of an internal shift. For years, I'd flinched when someone asked about my family. I'd stumble through vague responses, as if ashamed of the truth. Now, I said it plainly. "I have a biological family I'm no longer close with," I told a journalist during a follow-up piece on our company's expansion. "But I've found family in the people I serve, and in the people who serve beside me." She smiled like she understood. Because more people understand than we think. Not everyone gets the clean storybook version. Some of us get fragments. And some of us build mosaics. Lyle and I made it a ritual to check in with each other every Sunday. Nothing formal, just tea and a quiet question. "What boundary did you honor this week?" Sometimes mine were big, saying no to an obligation I didn't believe in. Sometimes they were tiny, not picking up the phone when my mother's name flashed on the screen. It wasn't about shutting people out, it was about letting myself in, claiming my time, choosing my peace. There was a moment, a few months later, when Carson sent a follow-up email. Short, clipped, almost apologetic. "I hope we can talk someday. I've started therapy." It's harder than I thought. I didn't write back, not out of spite but out of timing. He was beginning his reckoning, but I was no longer available to be his mirror. Instead, I wrote his name in my journal under the column titled, "People I Wish Well from Afar." It was a growing list, a gentle one. No curses, no grudges, just names I released from my need for understanding. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped apologizing for my joy. I let myself be proud of the home Lyle and I built. I let myself light candles and wear soft things and dance barefoot in the kitchen to old songs. I let myself say no to dinners, yes to naps, and maybe to possibilities that once felt out of reach. When our neighbors invited us to a block party, I went. When the local university asked me to speak to nursing students, I said yes. When one of our caregivers gave notice to pursue her dream of midwifery, I threw her a going-away party that made her cry. And I meant every word of the speech I gave her. "You are not defined by the people who didn't believe in you," I said. "You are defined by the people you showed up for, especially when no one else was watching." I had spent a lifetime trying to be visible to people who refused to see me. Now I was visible to myself. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I never set out to reclaim the bracket name. In fact, for a long time I considered dropping it. I toyed with the idea of taking Lyle's surname or just using my first and middle names like a poet or an author, reinventing myself completely, shedding the past like a snakeskin. But then something strange happened. One of our clients, a spry 91-year-old named Edwin, passed away peacefully in his sleep. He'd been in our care for almost a year. A jazz musician in his youth, Edwin had a sharp wit and a quiet dignity that never wavered, even as his body failed him. His daughter Aria sent me a handwritten letter after the funeral. "You gave my father the kind of care that made him feel human again. He told me once, that bracket woman treats me like a whole person, not a checklist. He said your name like it meant something. I just thought you should know." That letter sat on my desk for days. Every time I looked at it, I saw the possibility that maybe a name could be rewritten, not by erasing its past, but by reshaping its legacy. So I called our lawyer and filed paperwork to establish a nonprofit under our new umbrella, the Brackett Foundation for Compassionate Care. Its mission? To provide training and resources to unpaid caregivers across the country. The daughters, sons, nieces, neighbors, and partners who were thrust into care without support. We hosted workshops, created digital resources, even launched a grant for families who couldn't afford home care but needed it most. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was using the same name my family once protected like a trademark to now do the exact thing they never valued: offer care without condition. When the press asked about the name, I gave them the truth. "It's my name," I said, "and I believe in reclaiming what's mine." In time, Brackett began to mean something different to people. To nurses, it meant dignity in the workplace. To families, it meant hope in hard times. To me, it meant I no longer flinched when someone asked, "Are you related to the Brackett family?" Because I could finally say, yes, and I'm redefining what that means. We even created a mentorship program under the foundation, pairing experienced caregivers with those just starting out. The first cohort included a young man named Theo, who reminded me so much of myself when I started, all heart, always tired but lit from within by something unteachable. During our first session he asked, "Did your family always support this work?" I smiled. "Not even close." He frowned. "So how did you do it anyway?" And I told him simply, "Because people needed me, and that was enough." He nodded, eyes wide like he was absorbing something profound. "I want that," he said. "You already have it," I told him. "You're just learning how to protect it." It became a full-circle moment every time someone like Theo stepped into their own voice. Every time an overworked daughter called to say she finally slept through the night because of a Brackett Foundation grant. Every time I saw the ripple of what we built echo out into someone else's peace. The truth was, reclaiming my name wasn't about revenge or even redemption. It was about clarity. It was about separating the name from the pain and attaching it instead to something generative, something real, something I could be proud of. And when I finally stood under the banner of the Brackett Foundation, at our first caregiver summit, with hundreds in attendance and my voice cracking at the mic, I didn't feel like a fraud. I felt like the architect of a new lineage, one not built on inheritance but on intention. Some mornings, I still wake early out of habit. The house is quiet, just the ticking clock, the breath of wind against the windows, and the familiar creak of wood expanding in the walls. I make tea, I sit by the kitchen window. I let the light warm my hands before the sun is even fully up. There's peace in repetition, and in knowing that, for the first time in my life, I'm no longer performing for someone else's approval. The other day, I received a letter in the mail. Not email, not a typed note, a real handwritten letter. It was from my father. The envelope was elegant, addressed in his telltale all-caps script, and the card inside was thick, engraved with our family crest at the top. Always the Brackett way. His words were short, but not careless. "Marlene, we heard about the foundation. Your mother and I read the article in the paper. It's clear you've done something meaningful. I suppose we didn't always understand what that meant. But it's never too late to recognize it. Take care." Dad, there was no mention of the dinner. No apology. But also, no denial. I stared at the card for a long time, and then I put it in a box. Not to treasure, but to archive. That chapter was closed. Later that week I returned to the community center where Lyle and I had first posted our flyer for Gentle Pathways. The same corkboard was still there, dotted with babysitting ads and piano lesson flyers and job postings with little pull tabs at the bottom. I brought a new flyer, not for business, for the Brackett Foundation's caregiver support group. As I pinned it up, a young woman next to me tapped my shoulder. She looked exhausted in that deep soul-level way, eyes tired, shoulders tense. "Sorry," she said. "Do you know anything about that program?" I turned to face her. "I do." Her eyes welled. "I'm taking care of my dad. It's a lot." I nodded. "Come by. We meet Wednesdays, we talk, we share, no pressure, you're not alone." She held my gaze. "Thank you." I didn't even know what I needed until just now. And there it was again. Truth, tenderness, purpose. My holy trinity. That night Lyle and I sat on the porch with mugs of warm cider. The dogs snored beside us, the stars blinked above, quiet and endless. "You ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. I looked at him. "All the time," he smiled. "You've changed." "I've returned," I said, "to who I was before they told me I was too much or not enough." He raised his mug. "To the real you." We clinked. And in the stillness, in the soft hum of a life built not on resentment, but on radical self-trust, I felt it. Peace. Not the fleeting kind you get from being praised or proving a point, but the kind that sinks into your bones when you finally understand that your worth isn't waiting at someone else's table. You carry it with you, wherever you go. Have you ever spent years chasing approval from people who only ever gave you silence? Have you ever dimmed your light so someone else could feel comfortable? Then you know a little bit of what I lived through. But here's the thing. Your story doesn't end where they stopped clapping. It begins where you start standing. So I want to hear from you. Yes, you. Have you ever had to walk away from family expectations to find your own voice? Have you ever reclaimed something that was once used to make you feel small? Drop your story in the comments. Let's remind each other that success, joy, and worth don't need to come with someone else's permission. And if my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. You don't need a family name to be proud of who you are. You just need the courage to own your truth and the softness to live it out loud. This isn't just a revenge story, it's a freedom story. And if you're watching this, maybe you're next. Now tell me, what would your peace look like?